Comedian Joe Kwaczala is on the show today. I'm excited. I'm a fan, and he has a few different projects that are coming out or have already come out. One of them is with our friends over at 800 Pound Gorilla. We love those guys, and you just have a lot going on. Thank you for your time and for hanging out today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Well, where do you want to start? Because you have a couple different things that you're working on. You have a sketch album that just came out. Now, you also have another project that's coming out or getting ready to come out.
I guess that depends on what you're referring to.
Yeah, well, there's a few. So I was going through your stuff. Well, why don't you just work down the line and let's talk about
Yeah,
um
no, totally. I mean, like, so the thing that's really exciting me right now that I did put out with the great comedy label 800 Pound Gorilla is this album called Funny Songs and Sketches,
yes.
which is a kind of a throwback to the sketch album, to the, whether it's Tenacious D or Adam Sandler, this kind of the document of the audio sketch and also the kind of silly songs interspersed, and worked really hard on it for the past year or so, and was very excited to finally have it out there for people to listen to. And we are we've got some music videos that we've released and are continuing to release, and yeah, it's been getting a lot of good attention, and that's kind of the thing that I'm really out there screaming from the mountaintops about, is this new album.
It has to be exciting for you as a comedian and an artist to be able to put something out there, especially if you've been working on it for a long time and then now having people, audiences being able to enjoy it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I come from a stand-up background primarily, which is an extremely immediate response, and so that is so great. And I'm so used to that, telling a joke, audience laughs if I'm lucky. But then when you work on something like this, you don't get that feedback initially, and you have to wait and keep working on this thing. And what keeps me going as a stand-up is I can get that immediate feedback and feel good, and then I don't think about mortality. But then when I'm working on this album, it's like, okay, hold on, I need to wait. We'll get it ready, and then we put it out. And then you also don't really get the kind of live response. You read a nice comment, or hopefully someone says something to you in person, but it's different.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, obviously, yeah, as a comic, and if you're performing in front of people, there is that, even that initial validation, because, depending on how long you've been telling the jokes for and that sort of thing, the laughs get better and better. So when you're working on a project like this for you, like, where do you start and how do you decide what's going to go on the album? Because once it's there, it's there.
Right. Yeah. So, it's a combination of on one hand, I try to write more than I need,
Okay.
so I get as much stuff out there, and then I look at it and I see like what's working. I'm lucky to have some collaborators in the process as well to give me an extra pair of eyes to say like, hey, this is working, or this needs a little extra care, or maybe not this one. So
Yeah.
that I'm lucky to have people who are honest, and people who I can really trust, namely a guy named Daniel Clark, who, when I make videos, he directs my stuff, but then when I was doing this album, he was recording it, he ended up editing it and mixing it, and so he was really instrumental in the process. And then on the other hand, you kind of look at the stuff and you see like, okay, beyond just quality, like what fits with each other, right? Or
Mm.
does this, maybe this thing sounds too much like I'm aping Tim Robinson, so let's get rid of this. Let's try to keep it as original as possible, because sometimes your influences can come in a little too strongly, and then you have to evaluate and go, okay, you know what, maybe this one isn't saying exactly what I want it to. Let's go in this direction, that kind of thing. So it's a lot of, that's one way I approach it. And then another thing is just like, kind of, what do I try to put myself in the shoes of a listener. Like, what do I want to hear? What do I feel like isn't
Mm.
out there as much? in the sense of, if this is being done to death, I want to stay away from it. So, it's taking in all those different factors.
You mentioned something interesting because I want to talk about it, about your influences, because obviously as a comedian, as a creative, you do have influences, right? People
Hmm.
that you've looked up to. So how does Joe mitigate that to, I mean, I think it might happen just based on conversations I've had. I have a sidebar here of comics when they start, like they're
Hmm.
mimicking almost people to a degree. Not
Yeah.
that you're doing that, but do you get my point though? It's like now you've been doing this for a while, but you still have those influences. Like, how do you mitigate that so you don't wind up doing what you mentioned?
Yeah.
Not
No,
that
I
you're
mean,
not joke stealing or premise theft, but just kind of like sounding like, Jerry Seinfeld.
yeah.
Grapes, but no nuts or whatever. I don't know. That's a horrible
Right.
impression.
No, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, any person, I think kind of in any creative field, but I can speak to comedy, obviously. When you are starting out, you are pulling from a bunch of different sources, whether you are doing it intentionally or not. Usually it's subconsciously, right? You've
Right.
developed a sense of humor based on the TV shows and the movies and the comedians that you've watched and loved. And I would say for a lot of people that stuff informs the way you speak, even beyond the art that you're creating, right?
Mm.
So we are all this kind of rainbow of influences that then culminate in who you are. And so I think it's important to be aware of those things so you don't go, so you can catch yourself if you're like, hey, I feel like I'm maybe talking a little bit like Mitch Hedberg, or like this thing is showing up a little too hard. But
Okay.
I think naturally though, over the years of kind of developing your own voice, which I think just kind of happens through practice, through repetition, through doing shows, through continuing to write, through listening to the audience and feeling what they respond about what you are doing, and then adapting likewise. I think in general, then all those influences synthesize into your voice, into your
Okay.
persona, and then you don't have to think about it as much. But at the same rate, you do want to be aware of, like I said, there literally was a sketch I wrote, and I was like, you know what? I think I might be going too far in a Tim Robinson direction. And,
Interesting.
that's one of the most, I would say, like, especially among my circles, like the most known and celebrated sketch things that's happened in the past, 5 or 10 years. And so you don't want to find yourself doing that. And sometimes it's
No.
like I said, you don't know you're doing it, but it's just like so um enticing subconsciously because it's so fun and so great, and you start pulling from that. But I think having a and also again having additional voices and eyes and ears is helpful. Like I sent that to some people and I was like, listen to this and then let me ask you a question about it to see, like, am I crazy, or is this is
I
this
love it.
not where I want it to be?
Right. Well, that has been quite the kerfuffle over the years for comedians. And I myself have had one very popular comedian who has battled that forever, for 15 years. I won't say their name, but people know who it is. And I caught a lot of heat, but also got a lot of positive feedback for this person simply because of just who they are. I think it's interesting. That's why I always say to every comedian that I speak to, and I've spoken to a lot, I've been very fortunate, present company included, in the fact that what you do is so unique and so different than what anybody else does. Like if you're an actor, you have influences, you work hard. If you watch a film, you see a director's influences, like if they're a fan of this or that, you might see tinges of that. But as a comic and as a sketch artist, I imagine is it a constant battle to just check yourself, or have you gotten to a place where you feel comfortable enough that you can do what you just suggested, vetting the material with friends that you trust who aren't going to be yes people?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of the things that helps me is my default position when I write stuff and when I'm trying to come up with ideas is it's important to me to try and come up with things that are original.
Gotcha.
And I think most creative people, I would hope, probably the ones that I gravitate towards, are coming at their art with a similar approach, which is that if you see something cool, you're like, that's great, that's that person's, as opposed to being like, I want to do that, right? And so that's always something I'm thinking about, is like, I don't think I've seen this before, and that's always a good place to start. Like, I don't feel like anybody has done this particular area of life when it comes to stand up, or like if we go back to the album, it's like, okay, I don't think I've seen anybody do a comedy song that sounded like the Smiths. And so
Yeah.
that's one place that I started from, is like, that's music that I listen to, but I don't feel like I've noticed anybody from a comedy song point of view has done that, or has done Jimmy Buffett, or has, because that's how I approached the songs on the album. Was, it's a similar but slightly different thing when you're doing style parodies, because in this case you do want to derive from music for comedy, which, it's funny, you don't want to derive from comedy for comedy, and you don't want to derive from music for music. But if you're doing something that is intentionally meant to parody a style, then the very thing we're saying comedians shouldn't do and should stay away from is allowed, because then it becomes commentary on the thing. It's like
Right. Like
parody and
Weird Al would be
satire, right?
style parody for sure.
Right. And so as we were discussing this, that occurred to me. I was like, oh yeah, it's funny. The one thing you don't want to do in comedy, if you're doing comedy music, is actually a very fruitful endeavor.
Right. Like if you did like the Adam Sandler one, I don't want to say it, the POS car, like, you know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm talking about? Like that'd be
Yes.
like, hey, that's a little derivative of Adam Sandler or Goat Boy, stuff that's like Jim Brewer style. Well, I find you very fascinating because I've watched a lot of your clips. Have you been to Colorado before, in Denver, and performed here?
Oh yeah, I love Denver. I think Denver has one of the
Okay.
great independent comedy scenes in the country.
Yahtzee.
I have, and it's been a while since I've been there, but especially when I was like kind of coming up, starting to get a little bit, felt like I was good enough to leave LA and go somewhere, but not kind of accomplished enough to headline, say, like the Comedy Works or something. I was very fortunate to be able to go to Denver. There's like kind of a network of comedians there
Huge.
who produce shows, independent shows that are really good. And this happened to me several times. They would set me up with basically a full week's worth of great shows, not just in Denver but throughout the
Like Fort
area.
Collins.
So
Did you ever do the Verboten Brewery or anything with Dan
yes, so
Bublentz? Okay, so we know the same people, Dan and Jeff, that
and so
produced those
like David
shows.
Rodriguez in particular
Oh yeah, yeah, at the
was
fort.
was the guy who would
Okay,
bring me up
so
to
cool.
his shows in Fort Collins, and then I
Love
would
it.
do Brent Gill's show in Boulder. The Boulder Comedy Show was really one of the best shows I feel like I've ever done. Was always so fun. And then there were always just like go to Longmont or go to Colorado
Loveland, where I'm
Springs.
at, and play at a pizza slice and pizza. Yeah, I mean it's just crazy, the comedy boom here in Colorado. It's insane.
Yeah, I really, that reminds me that I really do have to get back, because I have had, I always felt like the audiences were so great, and also the shows just really treated the comics really well, to go to and do kind of these independent shows, whether they're in a yoga studio or a brewery or whatever, and get paid, get drinks, and then sometimes get a meal. It was really like, it blew me away. And like I going to Denver was very always an important stop. When I did my Comedy Central special, I made sure to go to Denver a few weeks before I filmed, so that I could get in front of really great real audiences, several shows a night, and really just like hammer out the details and get that thing in good shape.
That's interesting. My friend Jeff Albright, who, along with his producing partner Dan Bublentz, who do like the verboten shows and all the
Mhm.
brewery shows here in Loveland and Fort Collins. One of their jokes is we live off of meal and drink tickets. Like that's kind of our
Totally.
thing. When especially when they do verboten and they get free food and drinks for performing. Uh
It's
or
unbelievable,
like
and
even
it's not
at
the norm. It's
yeah,
not the
Loveland.
norm.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I've some of the best show I've been to recently. Obviously, the Comedy Fort is a great spot, but just here in Loveland, my friends who produce these shows, at Verboten Brewery, they've got a big show on Wednesday, like six comics, $7 to come see some of the best comedians in the corridor. I don't know if you're familiar with some of these guys and gals, but Sam Sisson, I mean, some of these
Mhm.
people are massive and headline comedy works, but also do these great shows. I could talk about this with you for hours. I think it's just so interesting. So you mentioned something going back on our conversation about finding your voice. At
Mhm.
what point in your career, Joe, did you find your voice and really settle into who you are, either as a comic or a sketch artist?
Yeah, it's funny. There are different stages and points in my career where I felt like I had it figured out.
Okay.
And then a few years later I would be like, "Oh, no, 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 no. Now I have it figured out. I thought I was really tapping into something, but now I've got it." And so it's funny how those cycles happen where it's like, "Oh, I thought I was great. I wasn't anything." I want to say it took, not quite 10 years,
Okay.
maybe something like 8 though, where I felt like for the first time I was getting like at different stages, like you do well, but it's all relative. And I started out in Chicago, where the audiences are very, very, I think, forgiving and very they're hot. They're kind, and that's good when you're starting out. Because you
You
can be
need that.
yeah, you can be deluded into thinking like, I've got something going on, and that's enough to propel you to keep going. And so I had different stages of that in Chicago, and then I moved to LA, and then have different. It felt like I was, I hit it really hard because I knew people who had moved from Chicago to LA who ostensibly quit because they couldn't handle the transition, and I was
Wow.
very, very mindful of that, and so I really hit LA hard, and I kind of started from the bottom again because I knew that was something. A lot of my peers were not. They couldn't swallow their pride to do that. So anyway, and so I worked back up, and I felt like it was maybe I'd done like 4 or 5 years in Chicago, and then maybe another 3 or 4 years in LA. And then I felt like, and it was right before all this Comedy Central stuff started to happen to me, I felt like the wheels really started turning. I started getting, I was really like, I had some jokes that I was like, okay, this is connecting in a way that I thought I was killing before, but no, I was not. Now I feel good, you know?
I love that. Yeah, you mentioned Comedy Central. You were part of that boom, so to speak, of getting the specials.
Mm-hmm.
I just had on Josh Schneed, who was part of that thing. Did you do albums on Comedy Central's record label, or were you kind of at the end of that when they sort of dissipated after the roast moved to the Comedy Store and they started producing their own stuff?
Yeah, I did not do an album with Comedy Central. I think I was lucky to be the last run of
Yeah,
TV half-hour specials for Comedy Central. They just
such an
do not.
iconic period of time.
I know, and that's the stuff I grew up on, and that's that was such a goal and like a validating thing in my career of like, oh yeah, I grew up watching Comedy Central Presents. All my favorite comedians did the Comedy Central Presents, and I get to do one. And it's not, they do them now for the internet, and I think that's really cool, and that's probably a great way to get the modern audience to follow and get to know these comedians. But it was really special that I got to do the TV special, the half hour on Comedy Central, cable package, the real deal. And that was That was really great. I think by that time they weren't doing as many. They used to like pick some of the specials to do albums, and I think they weren't. I don't know. It was a bunch of behind the scenes stuff that I wasn't 100% privy to, but I just think I don't know that they were doing as many stand up albums as they used to at that point. But I got the special, and I was happy with what I got.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, one last question or two here. I mean, you've had very measurable success. At what point in your career, or how have you in your career felt the most validated? Is it been by getting albums out? Is it been by your peers? What helps you feel validated the most at this point?
It's a great question, and
Thank you.
I have to go back to this album and making it because I wanted to include special guests in these sketches, right? Because it can't just be me talking to myself. And that's it. It's a good way to market the thing as well, to say who's on it. And I felt it was so validating that I reached out to some comedians who I really admire to be on it, and they all said yes, which felt like, okay, they've seen my stuff, they trust that I know what I'm doing, they like me, they think I'm funny. And these are people like David Cross and Nick Kroll and Al Madrigal and Patton Oswalt, like people who
Wow.
I, when I was wanting to get into stand up, even before then, when I was just a fan of stand up, these were the people who were really, really important to me. And that the list goes on, and I just feel so fortunate that these people were like, yeah, absolutely, I'll be a part of this thing. If you're doing it, yeah, let's go. And it was like, okay, this is not something. And I felt like if I didn't have the body of work, they would have been like, who are you? I don't know, but that was extremely validating, and all those people are on the album and are really, really funny.
Yeah, I was gonna say, talk about name drops. There's some massive people on this, and that helps you and social proofing. I mean, you've already had success, but to have them say yes and go, we want to do this, like that's a big deal. And then
Totally,
that's very
totally.
cool.
Yeah, I mean, like, and I even mentioned like Andy Richter's on the album, where it's like, I mean, that was a guy. How many hours of television have I watched where he's, it was just really, really, really something to get that and to have that and to, yeah, it's validating, it's elevating, it's really it almost makes me emotional,
Almost, but
almost, but I'll keep it together.
that's funny. Okay, so if people want to listen, get it, and follow you, where is the best place, Joe?
Yeah, so the album is everywhere you get albums, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, whatever. It's called Funny Songs and Sketches. And all the links to that stuff are on my socials, at Joe Kwa, JoeKwa on Instagram and TikTok. And I am still on Twitter at Joe K. And you'll find, all those places have my link tree that has like my website where you can get the album, where you can come see me live, where you can watch the music videos. There's a ton of stuff. I have a ton of video sketches out there as well. If you're looking to kill some time, I have got everything you'll need. So one-stop shop.
Love it, Joe. Congratulations, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Brett. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.